Introduction to chemistry. So, what is chemistry? Chemistry is the science that seeks to understand what matter does by studying what atoms and molecules do. So, throughout this PowerPoint, you're going to be seeing some bolded terms. Those are the terms that you have to pay attention to, write down, study, and will be appearing on your test. So, throughout here, we are going to talk a little bit more about the definitions for matter, atoms, and molecules. But matter, just in short, is anything that has mass and takes up space. Atoms are the building blocks of matter, and molecules are one or more atoms that are bonded together using chemical bonds. Chemistry can also be defined as the study of the composition, properties, and interactions of matter. Attempts to understand the behavior of matter extended back more than 2,500 years. Greeks thought that matter consists of four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Alchemists attempted to transform base metals into noble metals. So looking at the composition of ordinary things, we can see a container of soda, the different molecules that are found in there. We can see the lead in our pencil, and we can see DNA. That's part of our cells, and that's what makes us unique individuals. People often have a very narrow view of chemicals, thinking of them only as dangerous poisons or pollutants. But chemicals compose ordinary things too. The air we breathe, the water we drink, toothpaste, Tylenol, tea, everything around us consists of chemicals. I like to think of chemistry as the bridge between math and science. So chemistry is a good way to take mathematical concepts and apply them toward a scientific field. Here you can see how chemistry is central to the study of all other fields of science. So biology, medicine, toxicology, chemical engineering, nanoscience, geochemistry, physics. Chemistry is kind of central to the understanding of all of those fields. This is typically why we like to start with chemistry. So before you take any other classes, we typically prefer that you start with a chemistry course. And if you have already taken these other classes, hopefully they have touched on general chemistry in those classes. And if not, after taking this class, those classes are going to make a lot more sense to you. So chemistry is a science, and scientists operate under the scientific method. And the scientific method is a series of steps that scientists follow in order to make logical conclusions from results that they obtain from doing experimentation. So chemistry is a science based on observation and experimentation. Observation is when you look at something and notice something. So you're going to observe a trait. You're going to observe a change. There's something that you're looking at, something that you're sensing, feeling, hearing, smelling, noticing that's doing something. Quantitative versus qualitative observations. Quantitative is talking about a quantity. So quantitative is referring to some type of numerical measurement, so some type of number. Qualitative is referring to a quality. So a qualitative observation example would be like its color or its texture. Chemists often formulate a hypothesis, and a hypothesis is a tentative explanation of observations. Sometimes hypothesis is defined as an educated guess, an educated explanation of an observation. The laws of science summarize a vast number of experimental observations and describe or predict some facet of the natural world. So for example, the law of conservation of mass states, in a chemical reaction, matter is neither created nor destroyed. A theory is a well-substantiated, comprehensive, testable explanation of a particular aspect of nature. Laws and theories seem pretty similar. but I have another slide that kind of explains the difference a little bit better. So there's domains of chemistry that are studied. Macroscopic domain is familiar to us. It is the realm of everyday things that are large enough to be sensed directly by a human sight or touch. The microscopic domain of chemistry is almost always visited in the imagination. Micro also comes from the Greek that means small. Some aspects of microscopic domains are visible through a microscope. But you have to use special types of microscopes in order to see really tiny particles. The symbolic domain contains the specialized language used to represent components of the macroscopic and microscopic domains, such as a chemical symbol. So this is where we talk a little bit in more detail about the scientific method. Some refer to it as the scientific process. So we typically start with an observation and curiosity. So I can go back to one of my master's degree topics was looking at malaria and looking at whether malaria had a positive impact on the immune system or a negative impact on the immune system. Now, positive means that when malaria gets into the body, and the malaria bug is actually called Plasmodium, when Plasmodium gets into the body, your immune system is going to sense it and it's going to interact with it. Now, typically what we want to do is we want to cause a lot of inflammation. So inflammation is a good thing initially. And that inflammation is designed to kill off the Plasmodium. But after a while, we want the inflammation to go away. We want the inflammation to calm down after the bug has been killed. And there's different drugs that we can use in order to treat malaria. So one of the topics I looked at is the immune system's response to the bug. But then another topic I looked at was the drugs that were used to treat and how the drugs may induce inflammation or cause prolonged inflammation and prolonged sickness in the patient. So trying to keep this a little bit more simple, we're just going to talk about a drug here. So we observe that different things happen to the body when the malaria bug gets inside of you. That's an observation. Now I was curious of what drugs would be best to treat malaria. Which ones would not cause a lot of inflammation, a lot of bad things in the body. So I formed a hypothesis. I thought drug A would be really good at not only killing malaria, but also moderating the immune system so that the immune system didn't overact. So the observation was that malaria causes problems in the body, and different drugs can amplify or decrease the problems caused by the malaria bug. The hypothesis was which drug that I thought would be the best drug. So then we went out to perform an experiment. So we were able to collect blood samples from patients that had received different drugs over in Africa where malaria is very prevalent. And then in that experiment, we were able to measure different substances in the blood that would indicate whether the patient was getting better or worse. So the experimentation part was actually going out and measuring and testing the blood based on the different drugs that the patient received. So we got some results. Results are just what were the levels in the blood. So we looked at different inflammatory markers. What were those levels? Were they high or low? Did they change over the course of the time? Did it matter how long since the drug that they were given this? Did those levels change over time or immediately? And those types of things. So those were the results. From those results, we were able to draw some conclusions. Now, we couldn't just measure one person's blood and say, yep, this is true for everybody. We had to get a decent sample size. And through a decent sample size, it all involves like statistics. You have to have enough people in order to reach statistical significance. That significance has to do a lot with math. If you've never taken a stats class, then this is probably very confusing to you. But statistical significance is important if you're going to go ahead and publish some research. So the conclusions that we were able to draw is that this drug, when given immediately, causes a lot of inflammation, but then eventually the inflammation goes away. So the drug that we were investigating was actually a good option, and we were able to contribute to the body of knowledge saying that that was a good option. So looking at this chart here, we made an observation. Observation is just noticing something and wondering about it. Then you form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess. So you look at all the information, you go do some research, you see what has everyone else in the field done, and then you try to think, well, has anyone done this? What's missing? What piece of information could I investigate? And you make a guess about it. Then you're going to perform an experiment and make more observations. So you're going to actually do the experiment, and then you're going to obtain results from that. From those results, if those results are not consistent with your hypothesis, you kind of go back to the drawing table. Be like, let's say drug A didn't work. Let's say it was a poor candidate. Well, what about drug B? Can we look at that next? So you're going to continue this cycle until you find something that works, until you find something that answers your question. Then once you get positive results, the results are consistent with the prediction, you can contribute to the body of knowledge. So we can publish papers about it, we can talk about it, give speeches about it, presentations, go to international conferences and say, hey, this is what we found. And that contributes to the body of knowledge, so that other labs aren't wasting their time trying to investigate the thing that you just investigated. Now, they're welcome to reproduce the results, and they should be able to reproduce those results, but they don't have to because you did that work for them. Then, after a lot of contributions to the body of knowledge have been made, much additional testing yields constant observations, and that observation becomes a law. So if we have a lot of testing and a lot of the same observations are made, we tend to assume that there are no possible exceptions to this because many people have demonstrated the same thing in many labs in many different parts of the world. Then that observation becomes a law. When much additional testing supports the hypothesis becomes a theory. So if you do a lot of additional testing and that hypothesis tends to hold true, so that prediction that you made tends to hold true, then it can become a theory. So my theory is that this drug is phenomenal at curing malaria. We can't just do this with one experiment. Like I said, many people would have to demonstrate this in all labs in all different parts of the world. But the main difference between a law and a theory is because an observation can become a law, but a hypothesis can become a theory.